Picture this: your engagement party, surrounded by friends and family, the love of your life beside you, and suddenly your future mother-in-law stands up, wine glass trembling in her hand, and screams across the room for everyone to hear. "You're no good for my son." The silence that follows cuts deeper than her words ever could. But what she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had been quietly documenting every cruel thing she'd done to me for months. And tonight, the truth would finally come out. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm 28 years old, born and raised in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I work as a pediatric nurse at Children's Minnesota Hospital, spending my days caring for sick children and supporting families through their darkest moments. It's demanding work, but it fills my soul in ways that few people understand. My colleagues often say I have this natural ability to bring calm to chaos, to find light in the darkest situations. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that would become my relationship with Margaret Thornton. I met her son, David, 3 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Minneapolis. He was this gentle, soft-spoken architect with kind eyes and callous hands from weekend woodworking projects. David grew up in Edina, one of Minneapolis's more affluent suburbs, in a sprawling colonial home where his mother Margaret reigned supreme. She was 62, a former real estate agent who had built her identity around being the perfect suburban mother, the kind of woman who hosted elaborate dinner parties and measured her worth by her son's achievements. From our very first meeting, I could sense Margaret's disapproval radiating like heat from a furnace. She looked me up and down that crisp October afternoon when David first brought me home, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the marble countertop of her pristine kitchen. Her eyes lingered on my modest Target dress, my practical nursing shoes, the small silver cross necklace my grandmother had given me, the only jewelry I owned that held any real value. "So, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "David tells me you're a nurse. How noble." The way she said noble made it sound like a disease. "I suppose someone has to do those kinds of jobs." David squeezed my hand under the dining table, his jaw tightening. "Mom, Sarah saves children's lives every day. She's incredible at what she does." Margaret's smile never wavered, but her eyes grew colder. "Of course, dear. I'm sure she's very capable." That was just the beginning. Over the months that followed, Margaret's subtle cruelty became a constant undercurrent in our relationship. She would make comments about my humble apartment in northeast Minneapolis, a cozy one-bedroom place where I could actually afford the rent on a nurse's salary. She'd mention how David's ex-girlfriend Jennifer, a lawyer from Minnetonka whose father owned 3 car dealerships, always dressed so appropriately for family gatherings. The worst part wasn't the direct insults. It was the way she would undermine me in front of David's extended family, the sideways glances and whispered conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. During last Christmas dinner at her house, with its towering Christmas tree and expensive decorations, I overheard her telling David's Aunt Linda in the kitchen, "I just worry about David settling for someone so ordinary. He has so much potential, you know." But David loved me. That much was never in question. He would apologize for his mother's behavior, hold me close in his small downtown apartment, and promise that things would get better. "She'll come around," he'd whisper against my hair as I cried into his shoulder after particularly brutal family dinners. "She just needs time to see how amazing you are." 6 months ago, everything changed. David proposed to me on a snowy February evening at Minnehaha Falls, the frozen waterfall creating a magical backdrop as he dropped to one knee with his grandmother's engagement ring, a simple solitaire that had belonged to 3 generations of Thornton women. Margaret had wanted him to give it to Jennifer 2 years ago, before they broke up. Instead, it found its way to my trembling finger. Margaret's reaction to our engagement announcement was swift and devastating. "You're making a mistake, David," she said coldly when we called to share the news. "This girl will never fit into our family. She doesn't understand our world or expectations." But I had a secret weapon that Margaret didn't know about. 3 months earlier, after one particularly horrible Sunday dinner where she spent the entire evening criticizing everything from my hair to my career choices, I started keeping detailed records, not out of malice, but out of necessity. As a nurse, I was trained to document everything, to protect myself and my patients through careful record keeping. So I applied that same methodical approach to Margaret's treatment of me. I kept a small notebook hidden in my purse, and after every interaction with Margaret, I would write down exactly what she said, when she said it, and who else was present. I started recording conversations on my phone when I could do so legally. I saved every text message, every email, every piece of evidence of her systematic campaign to destroy my relationship with her son. The notebook grew thick with entries. March 15th, Margaret told the church ladies at St. Andrews that David was going through a phase and that I was just a temporary distraction. Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. April 2nd, Easter dinner. Margaret seated me at the children's table while Jennifer, who was there as David's cousin's guest, sat with the adults. When I tried to join the conversation, Margaret said, "Oh, Sarah, you wouldn't understand, we're discussing property investments." The turning point came in late April. I was working a particularly difficult shift in the pediatric ICU when my supervisor, Janet, called me into her office. My heart pounded as I sat across from her, wondering what I could have possibly done wrong. "Sarah," Janet said gently, "we received some concerning information today. Someone called our HR department claiming that you've been providing inadequate care to your patients and that you might be unstable." The blood drained from my face. "What? That's completely untrue." "You know my work, Janet. You know how much I care about these kids. I absolutely know that," Janet said firmly. "Which is why I'm telling you about this instead of launching a formal investigation." The caller wouldn't identify themselves, but they claimed to be a concerned family member who was worried about your mental health and professionalism. I knew instantly who had made that call. Margaret had crossed a line from personal cruelty into professional sabotage. She was trying to destroy not just my relationship with her son, but my career, the career I had worked so hard to build. The career that gave meaning to my life. That night, I sat in my apartment with my documentation spread across my kitchen table, and I made a decision. Margaret wanted a war. She was about to get one, but I wouldn't fight dirty like she did. I would fight with the truth. Planning our engagement party should have been one of the happiest times of our lives, but Margaret turned it into a battlefield. She insisted on hosting it at the Minneapolis club, an exclusive venue downtown where her social circle could properly evaluate me. David wanted something smaller, more intimate, maybe at one of the beautiful parks along the Mississippi River, but Margaret wouldn't hear of it. "If you're going to marry into this family," she declared during one of our increasingly tense planning meetings, "people need to see that we've accepted her." The way she said accepted made it clear that acceptance was the furthest thing from her mind. The guest list became another point of contention. Margaret invited everyone she knew, her bridge club, her church friends, David's former colleagues, even Jennifer and her parents. Meanwhile, my own guest list was heavily scrutinized. She questioned why I wanted to invite my co-workers. "Won't they feel out of place with our crowd? My college friends, are you sure they'll know how to dress appropriately?" And even my own parents. My parents, Tom and Linda Mitchell, were good, hardworking people from Duluth. Dad was a retired iron worker who had spent 30 years at the steel plant, and Mom had managed the local library's children's section until her arthritis forced her into early retirement. They lived in a modest ranch house near Lake Superior, the same house where they had raised me and my younger brother Jake. They weren't wealthy, but they had given me everything that truly mattered: love, values, and the determination to pursue my dreams. When I told them about Margaret's treatment of me, Mom's reaction was swift and fierce. "That woman is poison, honey," she said during one of our Sunday phone calls. "No amount of money or fancy houses makes up for a cruel heart." Dad was more reserved but equally concerned. "Sarah, are you sure David's worth all this heartache? A man should stand up for his woman, especially to his own family." But David was standing up for me, in his own way. He had started setting boundaries with his mother, declining some family dinners, and making it clear that criticism of me was unacceptable in his presence. The problem was that Margaret had become more subtle, more calculating. She would save her worst behavior for when David wasn't around. 2 weeks before the engagement party, I received a text message from Margaret at a.m. I know what you're really after. David will figure out what kind of person you are eventually. Gold diggers always reveal themselves. I screenshot the message and added it to my growing file. By then, I had dozens of text messages, hours of recorded conversations, and pages of detailed notes documenting her behavior. I had also started quietly reaching out to other people who had witnessed her treatment of me, gathering statements and corroborating evidence. The most surprising lie came from an unexpected source: Jennifer, David's ex-girlfriend. We met for coffee 3 days before the engagement party, and what she told me changed everything. Jennifer was a beautiful woman, polished and confident in the way that comes from a lifetime of privilege. But when she spoke about Margaret, I saw real pain in her eyes. I need you to know something about David's mother, Jennifer said, stirring her latte nervously. She didn't approve of me either. I thought it was because she wanted David to focus on his career, but now I understand the truth. What do you mean? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect where this conversation was heading. Margaret Thornton doesn't want David to marry anyone, ever. She wants him dependent on her, living in her orbit, being her perfect son forever. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She told me once, when she'd had too much wine at a Christmas party, that losing David to another woman would be like losing her purpose in life. That's not maternal love, Sarah. That's obsession. Jennifer went on to tell me about the ways Margaret had sabotaged their relationship, to the constant criticism, the deliberate exclusion from family events, the attempts to turn David against her. The difference is, Jennifer said sadly, I eventually gave up. I decided it wasn't worth the fight. But you're different. You're not going to let her win, are you? That conversation crystallized something for me. This wasn't about class differences or Margaret's snobbery, though those were certainly factors. This was about a woman who had built her entire identity around being the most important woman in her son's life, and she would destroy anyone who threatened that position. Armed with this new understanding, I made my final preparations for the engagement party. I spent hours organizing my documentation, creating a timeline of Margaret's behavior, and preparing for what I knew would be the confrontation of my life. David sensed my tension in the days leading up to the party. You seem nervous, he said the night before, as we sat on his couch reviewing the final guest list. It's just a party, Sarah. One night, and then we can focus on planning our wedding. I wanted to tell him everything about the documentation, about Jennifer's revelations, about my growing certainty that his mother would never accept me. But I also knew that David needed to see his mother's true nature for himself. He needed to witness her cruelty firsthand, in front of all their friends and family, so there could be no more excuses or explanations. I love you, I said instead, curling up against his side. Whatever happens tomorrow night, remember that I love you more than anything in this world. The morning of the engagement party dawned gray and drizzly, typical Minneapolis spring weather that seemed to mirror my mood. I spent the morning at the salon getting my hair done, nothing fancy, just a simple updo that made me feel confident and put together. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a navy blue dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, putting on my makeup with trembling hands, I thought about all the events that had led to this moment. Every cruel comment, every deliberate slight, every attempt to make me feel small and unworthy had brought us here. Tonight, Margaret Thornton would finally reveal herself to everyone she cared about impressing, and I would be ready for her. The Minneapolis club was everything I expected: all dark wood, crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated elegance that whispered old money in every detail. Margaret had outdone herself with the decorations, transforming the private dining room into something that looked more like a high society wedding reception than an engagement party. White roses and baby's breath adorned every table, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. David looked handsome in his navy suit, his face glowing with happiness as he greeted guests and accepted congratulations. I watched him move through the room with easy confidence, shaking hands with his father's business associates and laughing with his college friends. This was David in his element, surrounded by the world he had grown up in. My own family looked slightly out of place but determined to enjoy themselves. Dad had purchased a new suit for the occasion, his first in probably a decade, and Mom wore the dress she'd bought for my college graduation. They stood near the bar, chatting with my coworkers from the hospital, creating their own little pocket of warmth in the formal atmosphere. Margaret was in her glory, playing the role of gracious hostess to perfection. She wore a stunning silver gown that probably cost more than I made in 2 months, her hair swept up in an elaborate chignon, diamond earrings catching the light as she moved. To everyone else, she was the picture of maternal pride, beaming as she accepted compliments on David's choice of bride. But I caught the look she shot in my direction when she thought no one was watching, sharp, calculating glances that made my skin crawl. She was planning something, waiting for the right moment to strike. The first 2 hours of the party passed peacefully. David and I made the rounds together, accepting congratulations and posing for photos with various family members and friends. I met his father's business partner, his mother's bridge club, and seemingly every person Margaret had ever known in Minneapolis social circles. "Your dress is lovely, dear," said Mrs. Patterson, one of Margaret's church friends. "Such a practical choice." I smiled graciously, even as I added her comment to my mental catalog of slights. Everything was practical or sensible when it came to me, never beautiful, never elegant, never quite good enough for their refined sensibilities. The breaking point came during the toasts. Margaret had arranged for several people to speak: David's college roommate, his business partner, his uncle from Chicago. Each speech was warm and congratulatory, filled with funny stories about David and heartfelt wishes for our future together. Then Margaret herself stood up, wine glass in hand, and I knew immediately that this was the moment I had been preparing for. "I'd like to say a few words about my son and his fiancée," she began, and already I could hear the venom beneath her polished smile. The room fell silent, sensing the shift in atmosphere even if they couldn't quite identify it. "David has always been my pride and joy," Margaret continued, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "From the time he was a little boy, he showed such promise, such potential. Harvard Business School, his own architecture firm, a beautiful home in one of Minneapolis's finest neighborhoods. He could have any woman he wanted." Uncomfortable murmur rippled through the crowd. David's face had gone pale, and he started to rise from his seat, but Margaret held up her hand. "Which is why," she said, her voice rising, "I have to wonder what he's thinking now." Her eyes locked on mine across the room, and I saw pure hatred there. "Sarah, dear, you seem like a nice enough girl, but let's be honest, you're no good for my son." The words exploded across the silent room like a bomb. Gasps echoed from every table, and I saw my mother's face go white with shock and anger. David shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" he demanded, but Margaret wasn't finished. "She's a gold digger," Margaret continued, emboldened by her own fury. "A nobody from nowhere who thinks she can trap my successful son into marriage. Look at her, she doesn't belong in this room, in this family, in David's life." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was fixed on us, waiting to see how this drama would unfold. I could see Jennifer at one of the corner tables, her face a mask of pained recognition. She had lived through this same nightmare, just without the public humiliation. But this time was different. This time, Margaret had finally revealed herself in front of everyone who mattered to her: her church friends, her social circle, her son's colleagues and extended family. And this time, I was ready. I stood up slowly, my hands surprisingly steady as I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The room watched in fascination as I calmly scrolled through my recordings, finding the one I needed. "You know, Margaret," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent room, "I think everyone should hear what you really think about your son." I pressed play on a recording I had made just 2 weeks earlier, during one of our wedding planning meetings. Margaret's voice filled the room, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. "David is weak, just like his father. He has no backbone, no real ambition beyond what I've pushed him to achieve. He's too soft, too trusting. That's why he needs me to protect him from girls like Sarah who would drag him down to their level." Honestly, Sometimes I wonder if I failed as a mother, raising such a naive boy. The color drained from Margaret's face as her own words echoed through the Minneapolis club's elegant dining room. David looked like he'd been slapped, staring at his mother with an expression of complete betrayal. "How dare you record private conversations?" Margaret shrieked, but I wasn't finished. "There's more," I said calmly, scrolling to another recording. "This is from last month, when you called my workplace pretending to be a concerned family member, trying to get me fired." I played the recording of Margaret's voice, disguised but still recognizable, speaking to our HR department. "I'm worried about Sarah Mitchell's mental stability. I think she might be a danger to the children in her care. Someone should investigate her before something terrible happens." The room erupted in shocked whispers. Several people were pulling out their own phones, clearly recording this confrontation for posterity. Margaret's social reputation, so carefully cultivated over decades, was crumbling before her eyes. "You're destroying my family," Margaret screamed at me, but her voice was drowned out by the murmur of horrified conversations breaking out at every table. "No, Margaret," I said, my voice steady and strong. "You destroyed your own family the moment you decided that your son's happiness mattered less than your need to control him." The aftermath of Margaret's public meltdown was swift and devastating for her. David stood frozen in the center of the room, staring at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. The woman who had raised him, who had claimed to love him more than anything in the world, had just revealed that she thought he was weak and naive, a disappointment who needed her protection from his own poor choices. "David, honey," Margaret said, her voice now desperate and pleading as she realized the magnitude of what had just happened. "You have to understand. I was just trying to protect you. I didn't mean those things. I was upset." "I stopped talking," David said quietly, his words cutting through her excuses like a blade. "Just stop talking, Mom." The guests were beginning to file out of the dining room, some pausing to offer awkward congratulations or supportive words, others simply fleeing the uncomfortable scene as quickly as possible. I watched Margaret's bridge club friends gather their purses and coats with tight, disapproving expressions. The church ladies whispered among themselves as they headed toward the exit, their judgment clear in their sideways glances. Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who had called my dress practical earlier in the evening, stopped beside my chair as she prepared to leave. "I owe you an apology, dear," she said quietly. "We all do. I had no idea Margaret was like this." One by one, the people who had enabled Margaret's behavior for years through their silence, their polite laughter at her cutting remarks, their willingness to overlook her cruelty as long as it wasn't directed at them, filed past our table with shame-faced expressions. They were beginning to realize that they had been complicit in the systematic emotional abuse of an innocent person. Jennifer approached our table as the room continued to empty. "Sarah," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry I didn't warn you sooner. I should have told David what she was really like. But I was a coward." "You weren't a coward," I replied gently. "You were protecting yourself." "I understand. She destroyed our relationship too," Jennifer continued, looking directly at David. "I loved you, David. I really did. But I couldn't survive your mother's constant attacks, and I couldn't make you see what she was doing to us." David looked up at Jennifer with pain-filled eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you both. I should have seen what she was doing." Margaret, meanwhile, had retreated to a corner of the room where she sat alone, mascara streaked down her cheeks, her perfect facade finally cracked beyond repair. Occasionally she would look up at David with desperate, pleading eyes, but he refused to meet her gaze. My parents approached cautiously, my father's face red with barely controlled anger. "Sarah, honey," Mom said, wrapping her arms around me, "we're so proud of you for standing up to that woman." Dad was less diplomatic. "Margaret Thornton," he called across the room, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had worked construction sites for 30 years, "you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Your son found himself a good woman, the kind who saves children's lives for a living, and you tried to destroy her because you're too selfish to let him be happy." Margaret flinched as if she'd been struck, But she didn't respond. She sat there in her expensive dress, surrounded by the ruins of her carefully constructed social image, finally understanding the consequences of her actions. As the last of the guests filtered out, the four of us, David, Margaret, my parents, and I, were left alone in the elegant dining room. The string quartet had packed up their instruments and left. The waitstaff was clearing tables around us, and the only sounds were the clink of dishes and Margaret's quiet sobbing. "David," Margaret said finally, her voice hoarse from crying, "you have to forgive me. I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you." David looked at her with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "You sacrificed my happiness for your need to control me," he said. "You tried to sabotage every relationship I've ever had because you couldn't bear the thought of sharing me with anyone else. And when you couldn't drive Sarah away with your usual tactics, you tried to destroy her career. I just wanted what was best for you," Margaret whispered. "No," David said firmly. "You wanted what was best for you. There's a difference." He turned to me then, taking my hands in his. "Sarah, I am so sorry. I failed you in every possible way. I saw how she treated you, and I made excuses for her. I told you she would come around, that you just needed to be patient. But the truth is I was too cowardly to stand up to her." I squeezed his hands gently. "You're standing up to her now," I said. "That's what matters. Is it enough?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Can you forgive me for putting you through all of this?" Before I could answer, Margaret stood up abruptly, swaying slightly from the wine and emotional devastation. "This is all your fault," she screamed at me, her composure finally completely shattered. "You've turned my son against me. You've destroyed our family." "Our family was never destroyed," David said, rising to face his mother. "It was never whole to begin with, because you've been poisoning it for years. Sarah didn't turn me against you, Mom. You did that all by yourself." Margaret's face crumpled, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. She looked like a broken woman, standing alone in her designer gown, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. But then I remembered the months of systematic cruelty, the professional sabotage, the deliberate attempts to undermine my self-worth, and my sympathy evaporated. "I think," I said calmly, "that David and I should leave now. We have a lot to talk about." As we gathered our coats and prepared to go, Margaret made one final desperate plea. "David, please, don't do this. Don't choose her over your own mother." David paused at the doorway, looking back at the woman who had raised him. "I'm not choosing her over you, Mom," he said sadly. "I'm choosing love over hate. I'm choosing kindness over cruelty. I'm choosing the woman who makes me a better person over the one who tried to tear her down." We left Margaret alone in the empty dining room, sitting among the remnants of what was supposed to be a celebration of love but had become a reckoning with years of toxic behavior. As we stepped out into the cool Minneapolis night, I felt lighter than I had in months, as if a massive weight had been lifted from my shoulders. 3 weeks after the engagement party disaster, David and I sat in couples counseling with Dr. Martinez, a gentle woman in her 50s who specialized in family trauma and toxic relationships. David had found her through his employee assistance program at work, and we had been meeting twice a week as we tried to rebuild our relationship and plan for a future free from Margaret's influence. "How are you both feeling about the decision to maintain no contact with Margaret?" Dr. Martinez asked during our session. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even after everything that had happened, cutting off all communication with his mother was the hardest thing he had ever done. "It feels necessary," he said slowly, "but it also feels like I'm mourning someone who's still alive." I reached over and took his hand. The past few weeks had been difficult for both of us, but especially for David. He was coming to terms with the fact that the mother he thought he knew, the woman he had defended and made excuses for, had never really existed. The Margaret Thornton who had raised him was a master manipulator who had disguised her need for control as maternal love. "Sarah," Dr. Martinez continued, "how are you processing everything that happened?" I considered the question carefully. "I feel vindicated, but I also feel sad," I admitted. "Sad that it had to come to this. Sad that David lost his relationship with his mother, and sad that Margaret chose her need for control over her son's happiness." Dr. Martinez nodded. It's normal to feel conflicted about the outcome, even when you know you did the right thing. Can you both talk about what you've learned from this experience? David spoke first. I learned that love isn't supposed to be conditional, he said. My mother's love came with strings attached. I could have it as long as I lived my life according to her expectations. But Sarah's love, it's different. She loves me for who I am, not for who she wants me to be. I felt tears prick my eyes as he continued. I also learned that I have to be willing to protect the people I love, even if it means disappointing someone else. I failed Sarah for months because I was too afraid to confront my mother. I won't make that mistake again. And Sarah? Dr. Martinez prompted. I learned that standing up for yourself isn't cruel, even when it feels like it, I said. For months, I told myself that documenting Margaret's behavior was somehow wrong, that I should just accept her treatment and hope she would change. But people who are determined to hurt you won't stop just because you're patient or kind. Sometimes you have to fight back. Dr. Martinez smiled encouragingly. Those are both important insights. Now, let's talk about your wedding plans. How are you moving forward? We had decided to postpone our original wedding date by 6 months, giving ourselves time to heal and plan a celebration that would truly reflect our values and priorities. Instead of the large, formal affair Margaret had been planning, we were organizing a smaller ceremony at Como Park Conservatory, surrounded by gardens and natural beauty, with just our closest friends and family present. We're excited about it, I said. It's going to be completely different from what we originally planned, but it feels more authentic to who we are as a couple. The guest list had been dramatically simplified. Gone were Margaret's bridge club friends, the business associates she wanted to impress, and all the people who had attended our engagement party out of social obligation rather than genuine affection for us. Instead, we were inviting the people who had supported us through this difficult time: my family, David's father, who had filed for divorce from Margaret after the engagement party debacle, our close friends, and my colleagues from the hospital. What about Margaret's family? Dr. Martinez asked. David's aunts, uncles, cousins? Most of them have reached out to express their support, David replied. Apparently, Margaret's behavior at the engagement party wasn't entirely surprising to people who know her well. Several relatives told me they had witnessed her being cruel to other family members over the years, but no one had ever called her out on it so publicly. His uncle Robert, Margaret's brother, had been particularly supportive. He called David the day after the engagement party to apologize for his sister's behavior and to assure him that the rest of the family would be happy to attend our wedding, with or without Margaret's approval. She's always been this way, Uncle Robert had said during that conversation. Even when we were kids, Margaret had to be the center of attention, had to control everything around her. Your father and I tried to talk to her about her treatment of Sarah, but she wouldn't listen. The revelation that others in the family had noticed Margaret's behavior but felt powerless to stop it was both validating and heartbreaking. It made me realize how many people had suffered in silence under Margaret's manipulation over the years. As our counseling sessions continued, David and I grew stronger as a couple. We learned to communicate more openly about difficult topics, to set boundaries with toxic people, and to prioritize our relationship over external expectations. The crisis with Margaret, as painful as it had been, ultimately brought us closer together. 4 months after the engagement party, we received an unexpected visitor at David's apartment. Margaret stood at the door holding a large bouquet of flowers. Her appearance dramatically changed from the polished woman I had known. She looked older, thinner, and there was a desperate quality to her eyes that made me uncomfortable. David, please, she said when he opened the door. I need to talk to you. I've been seeing a therapist. I'm working on myself. I understand now what I did wrong. David stood firm in the doorway, not inviting her in. Mom, we've been through this. I told you that I need space. But I'm different now, Margaret pleaded. I realized that I was wrong about Sarah. She's good for you. I can see that now. I stepped up behind David, and Margaret's eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old hatred there, quickly suppressed but not entirely hidden. This woman hadn't changed. She was simply trying a different manipulation tactic. Margaret, I said calmly, I appreciate that you're in therapy, but David and I have moved on. We're planning our life together, and that life doesn't include room for the kind of toxicity you brought to our relationship." Her mask slipped slightly, and I saw the real Margaret underneath, angry, resentful, and still completely unable to accept responsibility for her actions. "You turned him against me," she hissed. "My own son won't speak to me because of you. Your son won't speak to you because of your choices," I replied firmly. "And until you can truly understand that and take full responsibility for your behavior, nothing is going to change." We closed the door on Margaret that day, and we never saw her again. Through David's father, we heard that she had moved to Arizona to live with her sister, telling everyone who would listen that her ungrateful son had abandoned her for a gold-digging nurse who had poisoned him against his own family. 6 months later, David and I were married in the Como Park Conservatory on a perfect autumn day. The ceremony was everything we had dreamed it would be: intimate, meaningful, and filled with people who genuinely loved and supported us. My parents beamed from the front row, my colleagues from the hospital threw biodegradable confetti, and David's father walked me down the aisle since my own father was too emotional to make it through the processional without crying. In my wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown from a local boutique that cost less than Margaret would have spent on a single table centerpiece, I felt more beautiful than I ever had in my life. Not because of how I looked, but because I was surrounded by love and acceptance, marrying the man who had finally learned to put our relationship first. During our first dance, David whispered in my ear, "Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for finally standing up for us." I whispered back, and we swayed together under the twinkling lights, surrounded by the people who had supported us through our darkest moments. As I looked around the room at our wedding reception, I saw my nursing colleagues laughing with David's architecture friends, my parents deep in conversation with David's father about their shared love of fishing, and Uncle Robert raising a toast to the couple who proved that love conquers all manipulation. This was what family was supposed to look like: not perfect, not wealthy or impressive by society's standards, but genuine and supportive and kind. 3 years later, as I write this story, David and I are happier than we ever imagined possible. We bought a modest house in South Minneapolis, close to both my work and his office, with a big backyard where we host barbecues for our chosen family of friends and relatives who love us unconditionally. David has started attending therapy individually to work through the complex emotions surrounding his relationship with his mother, and I've become something of an advocate at work for people dealing with toxic family situations. We still receive occasional reports about Margaret through David's father, who has remarried and found happiness with a kind woman named Carol who treats everyone with warmth and respect. Margaret, we're told, continues to live in Arizona, still bitter and still convinced that she was the victim in our story. She has never acknowledged her role in destroying her relationship with her son, never apologized for the pain she caused, and never attempted to make genuine amends. Sometimes late at night, David still struggles with guilt about cutting his mother out of his life. What if she really has changed? He'll ask me. What if she's alone and sad and really does miss me? Maybe she does miss you, I always reply, holding him close. But missing someone and being willing to change your behavior to repair the relationship are two different things. And you can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, even if that someone is your mother. The truth that humiliated Margaret Thornton at our engagement party wasn't just the recordings I played or the documentation I had gathered. The real truth was that she had spent years systematically trying to destroy her son's happiness because she couldn't bear to share his love with anyone else. She had disguised her selfish need for control as maternal protection, her jealousy as concern, and her cruelty as tough love. But the deepest truth of all is this: love is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down. It's supposed to celebrate your successes, not diminish them. It's supposed to support your dreams, not sabotage them. And when someone claims to love you but consistently acts in ways that harm you, you have not only the right but the responsibility to protect yourself. I learned that standing up to bullies, even bullies who are supposed to love you, isn't cruel or vindictive. It's necessary. And sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. Margaret Thornton thought she could intimidate me into disappearing from her son's life through a campaign of psychological warfare designed to make me feel small, worthless, and undeserving of love. What she didn't understand was that my worth wasn't determined by her approval, my character wasn't defined by her opinion, and my relationship with David wasn't dependent on her blessing. In the end, Margaret lost everything she was fighting so desperately to keep: her son's love, her social standing, her carefully constructed image as the perfect mother. She lost it all because she refused to understand the simple truth that loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even if their happiness doesn't revolve around you. As for David and me, we're living proof that love really can conquer all as long as you're willing to fight for it, stand up for each other, and refuse to let toxic people poison your happiness. Our marriage is built on a foundation of mutual respect, open communication, and the hard-won knowledge that we will always have each other's backs, no matter what storms we face. And that's a truth that no amount of manipulation, cruelty, or social pressure can ever change. If this story resonated with you, if you've dealt with toxic family members or manipulative people who tried to destroy your happiness, please remember this. You deserve love that lifts you up, relationships that bring out the best in you, and a life free from people who consistently tear you down. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you that you have to accept treatment that diminishes your worth or destroys your peace. Stand up for yourself. Document the abuse. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your successes instead of undermining them. And remember that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to walk away from people who refuse to treat you with basic human decency. Your happiness matters, your peace matters, and you are absolutely worth fighting for. If you found strength in Sarah's story of standing up to her toxic mother-in-law, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of courage, resilience, and the power of choosing love over manipulation. Share your own experiences in the comments below. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggle. Remember, you're stronger than you think, and you deserve so much better than settling for relationships that diminish your light.